Hi, welcome to Film Scene 21, where this time I'll be casting a critical eye over the latest James Bond instalment, No Time to Die. My name's Simon, and I'm on a quest to bring you real 21st century reviews of film and great television and the best ways that can be enjoyed through home media. There'll be some unboxings along the way, along with some of the tech that help me enjoy film and also bring my passion for it to this channel. Today I'll share my thoughts with you on No Time to Die. There will be spoilers, but I will warn you ahead of time on those. I'll also talk about the version that I picked up, which is this 4K UHD Blu-ray Digibook release. How did it stand up? What's the AV presentation like? The extras, the packaging? I'll talk about all of this. And also, if you stick around to the end, you'll see how both the film and the release fare with my score out of 10. Produced by Sony MGM and distributed by Universal, No Time to Die went through a reported 4 different scripts and was delayed several times. Mostly down to the global pandemic, as they wanted to preserve that theatrical experience for moviegoers, waiting until cinemas were fully open to the public again. Also, with a mere 4 months left prior to shooting, there was a director change. Danny Boyle was replaced with Cary Joji Fukunaga. The reason Danny Boyle left the project was cited as creative differences, that classic chestnut, and it was a number of factors involved, but mostly it was down to how they decided to, let's say how the finale of the film played out, which we'll get onto in a little bit. So to summarise the film is a little bit difficult, but I'll do my best. So following on from the storyline of the previous film, James Bond is left active service and he's on a trip to Italy with Dr. Madeleine Swan. It appears he's here to pay his respects at the burial site of Vesper Lynd, with whom he had a really deep connection way back in Casino Royale. Here, Bond is attacked and chased, and he discovers that the criminal organisation Spectre have tracked him down, and he's led to believe it's Madeleine who's betrayed him. So he sends her away and breaks all contact. 5 years later, and an MI6 laboratory is attacked and the biochemical weapon they're working on is stolen. Later on, James Bond is contacted by Felix Leiter of the CIA, who is trying to retrieve this weapon and tries to enlist Bond for his help. Bond agrees because apparently there is some link to Spectre with which he has some old scores to settle. The No Time to Die was the 25th entry in the series and was finally released in October 2021, a mere month shy of 6 years since the previous entry, so it's a long time in coming. But did it improve on the disappointment of Spectre, and was it worth the wait? Well, there will be spoilers ahead, so do skip to the next section if you've not seen this yet. Now, taken in isolation, if you forget anything that's gone before and any character development, you could sit back and perhaps switch off your brain a little bit. You could gain a certain amount of enjoyment from No Time to Die. There is some stunning cinematography at times, especially those scenes using the IMAX cameras. There's also some great set design and some excellent action set pieces. The pre-credit sequence in Italy was really good, and the scene in Cuba, although more on that later. And also in the final act there's a tense claustrophobic fight sequence in a stairwell, which appears to be a single take, although I think they did employ some clever editing there. However, the story is quite convoluted and very confusing, and sometimes it's unclear what the motivation of certain characters is for why they do certain things. Plus, there's also quite a lot of discord with the previous film, especially when they say it's supposed to be a direct sequel to it. I mean, for example, Madeleine says she's got this aversion to guns because she had to shoot a man when she was younger. Now, it's interesting because they use that scene as a flashback at the very start of No Time to Die, where we see the guy come in, who we later learn to be Lucifer Safin, played by Rami Malek, and she does indeed shoot him, but he survives and actually saves her from drowning in a frozen lake. So it's hard to know why she states this aversion to guns. And also, when he comes to visit her for an assessment at her clinic, she doesn't recognise him, although he seems to have this affinity with her, some sort of a connection. So was there some sort of a relationship they had when he saved her afterwards or not? We don't know. And then Safin goes on this vendetta against the world. We don't know why. So these things would have been useful to have explained. Also, it seems a little strange how Bond would lose faith so quickly in a woman he supposedly loves, believing that Madeleine's betrayed him just because a wealthy global organisation has tracked him down. With the resources they have, they could probably track down anyone. So it's rather muddled and sort of contrived, or just a bit messy. Now, that kind of thing has been rife during the past few films, and it kind of smacks of lazy scripting just to make sure a certain story arc happens around a planned action sequence. It's kind of what happens when you try and retcon a story to fit in with the films before, when you haven't really planned it out. I mean, they've created this 5-film story arc, but yeah, they didn't really think that ahead when they started making them, and so every time you try and feed it back, it gets a little bit messier each time. Then we've got a number of plot holes which you might have spotted if you've seen the film. I mean, how on earth did Safin survive during the flashback when you can clearly see a bullet wound where most of us have a major organ? Also, how come MI6 never knew Madeleine was pregnant, nor had a daughter, nor decided to tell Bond about it? Also, why would they permit her to be Blofeld's only therapist visiting him in prison, when they would have known that her father worked for him and that he'd captured and threatened her with her life previously? So some conflict of interest thing going on there. Also, why would they allow Bond to visit him without some sort of barrier between the two of them? Also, when Bond is at the cabin out in Norway, he can see that Nomi is tracking Logan Ash on his phone. You can see by the satellite picture, and they're both within the vicinity of where he is. So he leaves the house to escape, ends up having a mass chase sequence with the Land Rovers, etc., and then a battle in the forest. Next thing we see is him walking towards, we presume, the airport, and then up drives Nomi in Aston Martin and says, "Can I give you a ride?" I mean, where was she during all that? Didn't she want to give him a hand? And what about Primo? He seems to be working for Blofeld and Safin at various points in the story. So, I mean, it just needs to be something more clearly thought out there. Now, I don't know about you, but I look to a Bond film for that sense of adventure, the high life, and dare I say it, charm and glamour. But often we get a Bond who's quite miserable most of the time. Half the time he doesn't even work for MI6, being either resigned or presumed dead. He cuts quite a tragic cloth, coming across as too old or injured. I mean, it's really sad because this isn't really that fictionally aspirational character, or the one that we'd say, yes, I want to be that Bond. Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? And also, I don't know if it's the way it's been written, but Craig's Bond often comes across as quite smug and arrogant.
Has this desk got bigger? Or have you got smaller?
And often his line delivery is very, very flippant, as if he's just putting in his order at a restaurant.
Well, they just asked so nicely.
You rarely get that sense of urgency or importance, although the pre-credit sequence with Madeleine being an exception when they're in the hotel room.
How did they know I was here?
What are you talking
Madeleine, how did they know I was here?
And also, I find it really disappointing, the chemistry between the characters. A lot of those, and I don't know if it's just me, please tell me in the comments, a lot of those characters also come across as very entitled or overly self-assured, as if, you know, they were capable of anything. But I mean, wouldn't it be lovely to have some characters with humility and a sense of vulnerability, like us? You know, I don't know about you, but that really helped me to connect with them. Also, some of the comic exchanges.
You get in my way, I will put a bullet in your knee. The one that works.
Are delivered so mechanically. You know, it's like, this is a funny line, which you're supposed to laugh at.
I get why you shot him.
Yeah, well, everyone tries at least once.
And it just falls flat most of the time. But do bear in mind, we've had the same writers on these Bond films for over 20 years now. So it might be time for a change there. As I said before, there were some great action sequences, but some of them do feel a bit like a computer game. I mean, you've got Bond striding around out in the open with no cover, just picking off the bad guys with ease. You know, it's almost like it's been rehearsed and like he knows where they're going to appear. It just feels too easy. The kills aren't hard earned, and it removes any sense of danger from the situation. And if you don't feel like a character is in peril, then you just don't feel that sense of tension of the plight that they're in as well. Now, I'm thinking mostly of that scene in the woods where he's just walking across and the shots are raining in, none of them hitting Bond, and the action slice in Cuba, very much like a computer game. Now, I was really looking forward to that Cuban sequence. That's as we're going to be introduced to the stunning Ana de Armas as CIA agent Paloma.
This is going to go brilliantly.
I know. I've done 3 weeks training.
She first hit my radar in the excellent Blade Runner 2049. However, as engaging as she was and a very natural actor, the whole sequence felt rather rushed, almost like it had been shoehorned in. And it's a real shame because Paloma had something about her, you know, real sense of life coming out of the performance too, something that a lot of the other characters lacked. Then in the blink of an eye, it's over.
Next time, stay longer.
Same goes for the whole visiting Blofeld in prison sequence. It didn't really feel that organic to the characters, and again it felt shoehorned in, and the film didn't really need it. Now let's talk about the 3 major spoilers in this film. There's a new 007. Bond has a daughter, and Bond dies. I mean, the producers, which include Daniel Craig, certainly like ticking off first during his tenure as Bond, don't they? I mean, you got the first blonde, blue-eyed Bond, the first origin story, first time M dies, the first time Bond has a kid, first time Bond is killed. I suppose it's one way of leaving your mark.
By the way, I'm not just any old 00. I'm 007.
So the new 007, and she's a woman. Is this a shock? Well, not really, because as I explained, the number 007 is just an assignment code and can be given to any MI6 agent. What is disappointing though is that the character of Nomi, played by Lashana Lynch, is pretty irritating and annoying and doesn't really bring an awful lot to the story.
007?
That must bother you.
And I've seen Lashana Lynch in interviews and she's great. But none of this comes across in the character of Nomi, so that's a real shame. Bond's daughter comes from a performance from a newcomer, Lisa Doraisonne, and she's super cute. Now, while I don't have an issue in principle with Bond offspring, I think it's poorly handled here. I mean, you've been led to believe that this is a cold-blooded killer who's learned to disconnect emotion, and here we have him going all cutesy looking to this little cherub for affirmation on his brekkie preparation skills. So it's just not massively believable. Then we have Bond's death. I mean, initially I was appalled that they would do such a thing to such a beloved character. But I think I've realised that while the character is beloved, this iteration clearly isn't. Otherwise, why would they have done that? And to be honest, I'm not that unhappy to see the back of this version. Although I must say, and I don't know how it happened, but I did well up a smidge during his final scene. Although it doesn't take much to get me blubbering during emotional story beats. I think it was just quite well played by the cast, especially Ben Whishal's Q, and the music did help somewhat during that. And just as an aside, interesting note that previous actors Sean Connery and Roger Moore, who both played Bond, both passed away prior to this film's release, which is perhaps allegorical considering the fate of the character at the conclusion. Some of the other characters weren't that memorable. I mean, Léa Seydoux as Madeleine was good, as was her youthful counterpart in the flashback, and Ben Whishal's Q made the most of the scenes he was in. Finally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but I would say ever since the excellent You Know My Name by Chris Cornell, the songs that accompany these films have been pretty dour. I mean, it used to be songs that would sort of spark excitement or elicit the romance of it all. Either way, that would stir your anticipation for what was to follow. Also, it used to be, it felt like they were songs for the film, but performed by an artist. Whereas these days, I would say since Quantum of Solace, it's kind of like a song from the artist that just happens to be used for the film. Here we have Billie Eilish giving another kind of downbeat performance, and another sort of slow downbeat song, melancholy, that sort of thing. I mean, your enjoyment of it will really depend on how much you like her style of vocal, but even then I just don't believe it belongs in an action thriller. And I think that's what's happened to these films of late. whilst they are full of action, there's very little sort of element of thriller or suspense. And that's a real shame, and not a lot of spying going on, which generally is what James Bond is known for. So it's a real shame. The fun is gone, and the songs seem to embody that lack of verve and energy too. As those close to me will know, and I'm sure you've picked up during this review, I'm not a big fan of Daniel Craig, certainly not as his casting as one of my favourite characters, but I did approach his first film, Casino Royale, with an open mind, and I have to say I did quite enjoy it. You know, certainly the way it amped up the emotional aspects of it. It was still a generic action film, albeit a good one, but it didn't have enough of those familiar spy elements, such as going undercover and infiltrating the criminal's environment. The Bond films used to be fun, danger, escapism. The producers with these recent ones seems to have gone a different route. They've gone a bit more sort of literal, gritty, grounded, realistic. But those two things are just not really good bedfellows. Anyway, now that the 5 films in this arc are complete, it strikes me somewhat that they've been carrying out an experiment. They've tried a new type of actor, a new type of film structure. They've tried to link all these films together. I mean, in my opinion, it hasn't quite worked, and it's an idea of what not to do going forward. So I would like to see that changed up, and I'd love to hear what you think about it as well. And also, ever since, I would say, at least the first film, it's another example of perhaps the actor being given a far too much power in deciding how the film move forward, and certainly the character development, etc. And obviously the producers need to be held to account for that. But what do you think? Do you agree with that, or have you been quite happy with how the 5 films have played out? I'd really like to hear your point of view. So for those of you keen to know how the AV stacks up on this release, we'll get to that in just a sec. I've got some brilliant bits of trivia for you might be interested in. This film, No Time to Die, had a budget of $250 million, which is roughly 300 times that of the very first James Bond film, Dr. No, which had a budget of around $800,000 back in 1962. Locations are very much a defining feature of the Bond films, and this makes no exception, visiting some very beautiful and stunning locations around the world, including Jamaica, Italy, Norway, England, Scotland, and the Faroe Islands. So some beautiful places to look at there. Also, this is the first film in the Craig Bond era where the end credits do not begin with the Bond theme. No, in this film they finish with Louis Armstrong's We Have All the Time in the World, borrowed from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I don't agree on. I always think that these films should stand on their own and not borrow too heavily from songs that are that identifiable with other films. Discuss. What do you think? And finally, for those car fans amongst you, and especially those who love the Aston Martins, which the Bond films often feature, this film features no less than 4 models in this movie. You have the 1985 Aston Martin V8 Vantage Mark IV, which was previously seen in The Living Daylights from 1987. You have the 2020 Aston Martin Valhalla, which is a mid-engine Valkyrie hypercar, which is seen behind M in a wind tunnel, so it doesn't drive anywhere, but you can see it. You also have Nomi driving the Aston Martin DBS Superleggera Coupe. And lastly, and by no means least, you get to once again see the classic 1964 Silver Birch Aston Martin DB5, replete with a number of surprise gadgets as well. That gets to feature quite prominently, and here's a little model of mine I've had since I was a little boy, but it's a DB6, but it's quite cool to have that. I'm sorry if it's out of focus, but yeah, it's even got an ejector seat, but the little man went missing a long time ago when I was playing with it. And the bit a lot of you have been waiting for, let's talk about this release. This is the Italian Digibook version. It does have this J-card wraparound. So let's have some detail on the back, but it is in Italian, which I'll talk more about in a minute. And you've got to be very careful with these. They stick these on, and you've got to be so careful how you peel it off, because it will damage the booklet. Crikey. Anyway, so there we go. It's got the standard artwork on there. I'm not particularly a fan of that. it looks like he's a little bit constipated and someone's just shouted, "Oi, Daniel!" And he's looked round. So yeah, not massively fan of that. Inside you have this sort of a booklet with lots of information on the film and loads of pictures. This is very nice, very nice. Then you've got the two discs here. We have the 4K 4K UHD Blu-ray and then the regular Blu-ray above it there. This has the film and the extras, and the Blu-ray just has the film, interestingly enough. But going back to the booklet, when I ordered this from Amazon Italy, the booklet, the photo of the booklet had the text in English. However, as you will see, this is definitely in Italian. So I contacted them about this, and they were very good. They just refunded me the money and let me keep it. So excellent service from Amazon Italy. So just how good is the picture and sound quality on this release? Well, the film was shot in 70mm IMAX and also regular film. This release echoes the 2.39:1 aspect ratio of the standard theatrical release. It was also shown in IMAX and 3D, neither of which we get on this release, unfortunately. When it was shown in IMAX cinemas, wherever they had laser projection, it would have been in 1.43:1 and in 1.9:1 in other venues. So it's a shame that we don't get those IMAX sequences in their full aspect ratio, you know, even if it involves switching aspect ratios during the film, very much like we did with the Dark Knight 4K Blu-ray, for example. I suppose the ideal would have been perhaps to have two versions on here, utilising seamless branching, but anyway, we're stuck with just the regular. Bear in mind the film is 163 minutes long, so it's 2 3/4 hours, making it the lengthiest of the series. But I must say, picture quality is excellent. The Dolby Vision applied here is just superb. There is a liberal amount of grain throughout the film, which proves it was both shot on film and also hasn't been digitally smoothed over, which is always good. Although the grain lessens for those IMAX shot sequences, which I could spot a mile off. They look super lush. So it's very much a feast for the eyes for everyone to see. So what about the audio? The soundtrack is a huge part of this experience, and here it is phenomenal. The object-based surround track they put on here is the English Dolby Atmos track, and it's on both discs, both the 4K and the Blu-ray. As a bonus for the Italian release, it has Italian Dolby Digital Plus 7.1 on both discs as well, and the Blu-ray also comes with an English Audio Descriptive 2.0 track. But the Dolby Atmos, which is the one I listened to both times I watched the film, is just phenomenal. The music, the ambience, the effects, they are all around you. The dialogue is really clear. There is a really clever use of no sound or muted sound whenever an explosion goes off too close to Bond, and you're transported orally inside his head to hear what that would sound, that temporary loss of hearing would sound like. It's really nicely effective. So the AV presentation of this release is really difficult to fault. It's A+, it's excellent. And what about extra bonus content on this, so you can enjoy that once the film's over? You've got a number of featurettes and an extra documentary that runs quite a bit longer. They're very well made. They're all very interesting to watch. A little bit short, some of these. I mean, we've got Anatomy of a Scene Matera, which takes you through the pre-credit sequence they film in Italy with the car chases through those narrow cobbled streets. That runs about 11 minutes. Then we have Keeping It Real, The Action of No Time to Die, which runs about 6 minutes, speaks for itself. Then we have A Global Journey, runs for about 8 minutes, just under that, and that talks about the locations and what have you. And then we have Designing Bond, talking about costume set design. Again, that runs about 11 minutes. Then we have this feature length, a very long documentary, about 3/4 of an hour long, called Being James Bond, which very much talks about the Daniel Craig tenure as Bond and his time in the tuxedo. So lots of bigging him up in that. But if you like that sort of thing, it's interesting to hear them talk about it. But it's a bit of a loving. But one point to note: all these features are only featured on the 4K disc in this set. There are none of them are on the Blu-ray. Only the film is on the Blu-ray. They're all on the 4K disc, and they're all in 4K except the Being James Bond documentary, which is in just regular 1080p high def. So bear that in mind. And also it's exclusive to the 4K, that documentary, and not on the standalone Blu-ray release, so just bear that in mind. You also get subtitles for the film in English and Italian. The English subtitles I did use a few times where I couldn't understand what somebody said, where they mumbled it or something, so especially the Safin character, and a couple of times with Madeline with her little French accent. It was a little bit difficult, but yeah, very handy to have on the disc as well. And what about alternate versions to the Digibook? Well, obviously you've got the regular keep case version that came in the slipcover in the initial release. That ran you about £25. Then you have a steelbook that was exclusive to Xavier in the UK and Best Buy in the US, which has different artwork to this. I probably prefer it. The DB5 covers up Daniel Craig a bit more, and there's some bullets flying around. But strangely enough, they do not follow the design round to the back, which is just bizarre and a bit silly. But that'll run you about £30. Then you've got this Digibook, it was about €35 when I got it, Amazon Italy obviously. Then you can go up to the limited gift set first edition, exclusive to HMV in the UK, where you get a mini keyring of a DB5 plus an exclusive mini book and some art cards. That will run you £60 though. But that's got nothing on the limited gift set with exclusive Aston Martin diecast model car, sort of a certificate of authenticity, I believe signed by the director, and also some 6 collectible art cards, which will run you the princely sum of £230. So that's for the true collector out there among you. They're the options ahead of you, so pick which ones suit your wallet, but they all have the same special features, so you won't be gaining anything there by going up a notch. I always find there are so many things to talk about when it comes to the James Bond series, and it's something I'll probably return to. Probably if they ever bring out a big 4K box set of all the films, I'll do a review on those and have a look at them. Now, I've seen the film twice. I saw it once on my own, then I managed to convince my viewing partner to watch it with me as well. She's certainly not a fan of Daniel Craig, but you know, it's an entertaining diversion for a few hours, and there's plenty to digest in there. But whether or not I stand up to repeat viewings, it will definitely depend on your appreciation for Daniel Craig as a character and the rife with retconning universe they've surrounded him with. So what about some scores for No Time to Die? Well, not been a fan of Craig or where these stories have gone. That being said, there's some excellent action in here, some lush photography, some lovely music. So although not a bore fest, you know, there are some inconsistencies in the storyline. There's not much character development, poor scripting. So all things being considered, I'd score this a 5 out of 10. With regards to the picture, I'd go for a 9. It's a shame they couldn't get the full aspect ratios for the IMAX. The sound is a definite 10. Extra features, probably a 4. And the packaging for this one, I'd say it's 7. So averaging all those scores out, it's probably a 7 overall for this release. If you're intrigued, let me know what one you're going to go for. And I'll be interested to hear your comments as well down in the section below. So there it is. If you like that, please do let me know by giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to grab any of the releases, there'll be links down below along with links to join me on Twitter and Insta. Plenty more videos on my channel, so click on the link and subscribe to join the Film Scene 21 fam. It's been a blast. Enjoyed seeing you here today. My name's Simon, as usual, and I will return, very much like James Bond, apparently. Bye-bye for now. Do take care and I'll see you next time.